Hey, it's Neil, your host of a Vietnam podcast. If you know anything about me, you know I'm a massive fan of craft beer. So I'm really excited to say that we are partnered with Seven Bridges Brewing Company. Make sure you check out their newest tap room on Dong Yu Street. It's got over 40 taps of craft beer, of course including their own brews, but guest beers, and then even some wine as well if you're not a beer drinker. One of my favourite beers when I go there is their Hai Van Haze. And if you want something a bit fruitier, a bit lighter, don't miss out on the Yuzu Wheat, a really fruity and refreshing beer that won the 2023 Champion Fruit Beer of Asia. Now, one of the coolest things about Seven Bridges is their sustainability and their zero waste mission. They even turn their brewing byproducts into their signature dragon hot sauce and use the spent grain from their brewing process to make their pizza. And I'll share a secret with you. The main reason I go there is for the pizza. The slices are incredible, and there's not many places in Saigon that do pizza by the slice and then add that dragon hot sauce on top. It is amazing. Also, if you know anything about me, you know I love a discount, you know I love happy hour. So make sure you go to the Dong Yu location, which has happy hour, 30% off all draft beer from Monday to Thursday, 1 to 5 p.m. But each of the tap rooms all have their different special offers. So look them up before you go. And when you do go, make sure to let them know that I told you to go, or better still, take me with you and buy me a beer when we're there, because I love it when people buy me a beer. If you're an expat like me, you will know that finding the right health insurance can be a bit of a headache, and that's where Tenzing Pacific comes in. Being in a new country like Vietnam, look, it's so exciting, but if you know me and you've heard past podcasts, you know I never go without health insurance because it's so important and things can get tricky really fast. You need to make sure you have coverage that works both locally and internationally, and you really just don't want the hassle. So Tenzing Pacific makes it really easy. They specialize in personal health insurance for expats, and they offer plans that are customized to fit your lifestyle. And with access to a global network of hospitals and a super smooth claims process, and to me that is super important because I hate dealing with health insurance claims, then you can focus on what matters and just getting on with living your life. If you're looking for health insurance or even just a second opinion on your current plan, I would advise talking to a Tenzing advisor today. I've worked with them in the past for podcasts and at my quiz nights, and they're a really great bunch of people and their insurance is amazing. So click on the link in the description and you will get, as a Vietnam podcast listener, special pricing and, of course, top-notch services. One of the things that I harp on about and talk about is how much Saigon has changed. Where we are right now, 8 years ago, I think, was a swamp. I'm pretty sure there was nothing here. Since 2019, when we started this podcast, how has Saigon changed for you as a city, and how have you changed within that time frame as well?
I think actually the last one we got into that quite a bit, of the old and the new kind of bumping up against each other. That's something that's been in my mind since I moved here and continues to be, obviously, as the city develops. You see it more and more. There are like a lot of vestiges of that old Saigon that just will not go away, and I hope they never go away. But seeing the new stuff bump up against the old stuff it's just, I love seeing it.
What was Korea like compared to Vietnam?
Oh, dude, night and day. So living in South Korea, the only foreigners that I was aware of were people like me, ESL teachers, and then all the U.S. military that were there. Like when I came to Saigon, like my eyes were bugging out of my head, and like on vacation the first time, and I had this goofy grin on my face for the whole 2 weeks that you just couldn't knock off.
Welcome back to take 3 of this episode of a Vietnam podcast. We've had the power cut out twice. Third time I forgot to press record on the pod track. Technical difficulties. You would never believe that I do this for a profession. It's completely different recording yourself than being on the opposite end and recording other people and being paid to do it. It's much easier. So if you haven't guessed already, I'm Niall and Mischa. I'm your host of a Vietnam podcast. This podcast started in 2019 as a hobby for me to talk to people in Saigon, and it developed into a Vietnam podcast from a Saigon podcast as I spoke to people from all over the world. And I still speak to people to share their story. And in season 10, I've been sharing my own story for the first time ever. I've been sharing with you the top places to go for craft beer, for cocktails, happy hours, and Bloody Marys as well. And in season 10, I've been talking to previous guests and finding out where they are now. So in this episode, I'm really excited to talk to someone who was, I think, the 4th or the 5th ever guest on a Saigon podcast, as it was known at the time, all the way back in 2019 when I lived in Funyan and we filmed in my front room. And full circle, we are now filming in my front room again, but in a different location. I'm really excited to welcome the previous sales director from Pasteur Street Brewing Company, which was your title at the time when we recorded. I'm very excited to talk to Mischa Smith.
Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties as well. Now, I want to hear, because you've lived in Saigon for 11 years. I've been here for 8. Saigon has changed dramatically in that time. How has it changed for you?
So like you said, the first podcast we did together, and just to say, I love listening to podcasts. So when you asked me to be on it, of course, I was going to say yes. And however many times I've been on since, yeah, I like listening to podcasts. So I like doing them and sharing my story, other people's story. Obviously, we did the Beer Stories podcast with Alex. It's still available on Spotify. I was re-listening to one of the episodes the other day. But yeah, so I've actually changed jobs twice since the first time we spoke. Still sales, all sales. Prior to Pasteur Street, I had no sales experience. I was a server and a bartender back home, and then I moved to South Korea and I was teaching ESL. And then I moved to Vietnam, obviously. Started out doing ESL here as well. And then about a year and a half in, Pasteur Street Brewing Company opened. And my last bartending job before I left Canada was at Craft Brew Pub. And I loved craft beer. And craft beer was like just starting to get to Korea when I was leaving. So I was there for 4.5 years and it really just wasn't a part of my life anymore. And then when I got to Saigon, there was no craft beer to speak of at the time. And then there was starting to be some like, oh, there's a craft cider. I'm not a big cider guy. I heard about Fuzzy Logic, and they were available at like 1 or 2 bars in District 2, like friends of theirs that just had some kegs on. Obviously, Platinum Pale Ale became a thing. They eventually got more crafty than they had originally sought out to be. But yeah, when I saw the ad for Pasteur Street Brewing Company on Facebook, it was a location, which didn't exist yet. It was its own, called a tap room now, but its own bar, serving its own beers. There were 4 different beers on tap. I was so excited just to have craft beer. And then when I got there and tried them, I'm like, oh, these are like actually really good. So yeah, I started out behind the bar. And I think you've got a funny story about me being behind the bar, yeah?
Well, I mean, so I lived in Wellington, New Zealand at the time, and craft beer was massive there. I say massive, but it was booming. It was the start of the kind of craft beer phenomenon, like bars popping up left, right, and centre. Came to Vietnam on a holiday in 2015. And of course, one of the first places we went to was the only tap room in Saigon at the time, which was Pasteur Street Brewing Company. And I was looking at one of the pictures recently, and I have a picture of the menu from then. It's 2015 still.
The corkboard menu with the little pieces of paper. Yeah.
They still had the passion fruit wheat, still had the jasmine, and a whole bunch of other mulberry wheat ale was on it, I think, and a couple others. And I was like, wow, those, I remember. And then even the Nashville chicken was still like the food.
The Nashville chicken and Jasmine IPA are like the 2 staples of Pasteur Street.
Yeah.
And they were from the start. Crazy. And it's crazy that, whatever, 10 years later now, those are still the anchors of the menu at.
And the other thing was, as I was looking through these pictures, I met Mischa and we become good friends, made podcasts together. And I was looking through the pictures and I found a picture of me and Adri, and in the background, who's serving beer? But none other than Mischa Smith in the background. So
I had business cards that said barkeep. I've never been more proud of my life.
So that's a famous picture of mine. Absolutely. It's such a cool, because when I would have taken that picture, I think who we were with probably spoke to you, knew who you were, maybe, I can't remember, but we wouldn't have known you from Adam. Didn't keep in touch or anything. Wasn't until years later that we now see you often and make
that's funny.
podcasts together. But so, what was Korea like compared to Vietnam?
Oh, dude, night and day. So with the caveat that I lived in 2 cities in Korea, both of them smaller cities. It just wasn't as fun. Like when I came to Saigon, like my eyes were bugging out of my head, and like on vacation the first time, and I had this goofy grin on my face for the whole 2 weeks that you just couldn't knock off. And then another big difference, and one of the reasons I ultimately made the decision to move here, living in South Korea, the only foreigners that I was aware of were people like me, ESL teachers, and then all the U.S. military that were there. And that was it. There must have been others, but I don't remember meeting them, like different social circles. And again, smaller cities. So if you're an American business tycoon living in South Korea, you're going to be in Seoul. You're not going to be in Pyeongtaek. But then, yeah, when I came here on vacation for the first time, I was just like randomly meeting dudes from all over the world, like doing different interesting jobs. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And the city's cool. And the country's cool. And so I did some research, and the ESL jobs here didn't pay quite as much as Korea. But then the cost of living leveled it off. And I had paid off most of my debts while I was in Korea. I did a pretty good job of saving money while I was there. So I was ready to move for sure. Like after 4.5 years in Korea, I was ready for a change. And one of the things in my head was like, I'll move over there. I'll get an ESL job because I'm good at it now. And that's what I've been doing for a while. And that can be like my entry into this new city and country that I love. But also in the back of my mind, I was like, maybe I'll figure out what I really want to do. Like because I didn't really have a career at the time. I was a server and a bartender back home in Canada. Then I did the ESL thing for a while, which I think a lot of people we meet over here have chosen that path. But yeah, I didn't want to be an English teacher for my whole life. It wasn't my chosen profession. It was always supposed to be an interlude. So then, yeah, at Pasteur Street, I was a customer the first 3 weekends that they were open. And then by the fourth, I was volunteering behind the bar 1 night a week for free beers. And then obviously, as you said, like grew to be the sales director of the company. I was there for 8.5 years.
One of the things that I harp on about and talk about is how much Saigon has changed physically and as a city within, like where we are right now. 8 years ago, I think, was a swamp. I'm pretty sure there was nothing here. And now we're in like this really nice building. So Saigon has changed dramatically. So since 2019, when we started this podcast, how has Saigon changed for you as a city, and how have you changed within that time frame as well?
I think actually the last one we got into that quite a bit of the old and the new kind of bumping up against each other. And that's something that's been in my mind since I moved here and continues to be, obviously, as the city develops. You see it more and more. There are like a lot of vestiges of that old Saigon that just will not go away. And I hope they never go away. But seeing the new stuff bump up against the old stuff it's just, I love seeing it. It's hilarious. And I don't think I told this story on the last pod, and forgive me if I did, if anybody's listening to both. But I was walking down the street with my boss at the time, John Reed from Pasteur Street, and we were coming from a meeting back to the tap room. So we were walking south down Pasteur Street, and there was a new Dairy Queen that had just opened up. And Dairy Queen was not a thing yet in Vietnam. It was new Dairy Queen. It didn't make it. Good riddance. I'll tell you the Subway story as well. Subway sandwiches, not the Metro.
that will come one day, the Metro.
So I think there was an employee outside with that spinner and whatever. And then a few feet off the entrance on the sidewalk, there was this old lady with those little baking machines that do the little desserts. So there's an old Vietnamese lady selling desserts outside of like this big franchise dessert place. And John, he just cracked up and he said to me, like, I'd love to hear the conversation with someone from Dairy Queen corporate who comes down and sees this old lady selling desserts outside of their ice cream shop. I'm like, can we ask her to move? It's like, you can. She's not going to. It's her city. We're guests here. So like, that's just the most memorable example of that, like old and new bumping up against each other. And Dairy Queen didn't make it. But that old lady, I'm sure she's still out there.
Well, it's an interesting point because there is quite a few Western chains that haven't made it. Like Dunkin' Donuts came and went. I don't think Krispy Kreme ever came. Like when we land in like Indonesia and I see a Krispy Kreme, I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting a donut. Like that's me.
I didn't think Starbucks was going to last because the coffee culture here is so vibrant and strong, and it's so ingrained that I assumed it would be a difficult transition for local people to start going to Starbucks instead. But obviously, I don't know their numbers, but you can see by the number of locations they have, Starbucks isn't going anywhere.
If I see one more post or one more content creator like myself, content creator post about Starbucks is failing in Vietnam, where they're opening new stores like every week, I'm like, it's definitely not failing.
Well, that's it. There was a bunch of articles about McDonald's as well, and I know some McDonald's locations closed, but they're still here.
I don't think it's flourished as much as they would like, because McDonald's do want one on every corner.
Sure, no, of course. But to write some clickbaity thing about like, oh, meh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I know the voice.
I'm doing the smug content creator voice.
I think with Starbucks, it's a brand, it's a location. I drink Starbucks every now and again. It's just something that's probably a thing.
But what did we do right before recording this podcast?
I went across the road for a local coffee.
Exactly, for a Frappuccino out of the back of a noodle shop. That's super local.
And it was delicious. And
I don't know what the closest Starbucks is, but yeah, you were saying
it's
like
around the corner. I know exactly.
Right, but you prefer to go to the little local shop. Yeah. Right.
I think the big difference is, and I don't want to get down too much into coffee because I will go down a rabbit hole, but Vietnamese coffee is Robusta coffee, and it's made in a fin and made with condensed milk, and that's the vibrant coffee scene that everyone knows and loves. And now one of the big changes that I've noticed is they're moving more to Arabica and espresso machines, to the detriment of Vietnamese coffee, unfortunately. And so as Vietnamese, especially Saigon, as there's a growing middle class in Saigon who want Arabica coffee, they want cappuccinos, they want frappuccinos, they want these fancy coffees from somewhere like Starbucks. It's a status thing for the growing middle class. And thankfully, Saigon does have a growing middle class. That's what makes it such an exciting, vibrant city. I think that's where Starbucks falls into that category. I don't think McDonald's falls into that so much, that just because you have a growing middle class, they don't want to go to McDonald's. They want to go to nice restaurants and drink nice craft
Right.
beer.
There's nothing high status about going to McDonald's.
So I think that's why McDonald's exists, but it's not booming for sure. I mean, in the 8 years I've been here, I think there's been one that's opened. I can only think of maybe a couple, but my point is it's not booming. Starbucks, everyone loves to hate on it. It's a big corporate brand, and that's fine. It is what it is, and it has a place. It's not the best coffee, but you can also get other good local coffee as well.
My college girlfriend worked at Starbucks, and she used to get really annoyed when people would be like snooty about, high-minded about Starbucks. She's like, I don't need to get into details, but yeah, I'm sure there are more evil corporations in the world than Starbucks.
Yeah, it's like pick your battles, right?
Yeah, and it's such an easy target because they're everywhere. It's just, I remember the first Shrek movie, everybody ran out of one Starbucks and right across the street into another one, and that got the biggest laugh in the theater. How
has Saigon changed in the 5 years since we recorded, for you personally and as a city? So after
8.5 years, I left Pasteur Street. It was kind of a timing and circumstances. In coming out of COVID, Pasteur Street reached a deal with Carlsberg, Vietnam, for them to take over the domestic distribution of Pasteur Street beers, which was my department, basically sales and logistics. So my team all transferred over to Carlsberg. I remained employed by Pasteur Street. My role changed a bit. Obviously, I was very involved with the transition of handing over all of our clients and accounts. And then the idea was that I would focus more on international sales, which if you want to fly me around Asia, sell beer, I'd love to. Unfortunately, obviously with the timing coming out of COVID, and also just frankly with a lot of other countries having very robust local craft beer markets, export just wasn't really booming. So I got us into Singapore, and the volume there was pretty good, and the guys were awesome. They were really supportive, but it wasn't enough to justify like what I was doing. So my contract was coming up, and I sat down with my boss at the time, Tom, and we just had a really good chat, really positive about all the work we'd done, and trying to figure out if there was a better fit for me in the company moving forward. And, after putting our heads together, we're both pretty smart guys. We're both very passionate about the company. We just didn't see it. So it just seemed like a kind of a natural ending point. Leave on good terms. Obviously, I had no intentions of leaving Saigon. I love it here. I knew I'd be able to find another job based on my extensive experience at Pasteur Street and my reputation around the industry based on the work that we did together there. So I was talking to a few different people. Obviously, I took a little bit of time off to just relax. I'd been pretty deep into things for quite some time, taking a couple of weeks off I kicked it up to Hoi An and spent some time up there. So I wasn't like really pushing hard to find the next thing. I felt like some things would come to me. And then there were other like feelers that I put out for stuff that I thought might be good. And the stuff that I was proactive about, none of it worked out. But from the offers that I was getting, or at least the offers to have the conversation that I was getting, one really stood out. So I knew two of the main players of the three in this company in Hanoi called VDD, and they're still working on being Vietnam's first single malt whiskey supplier. But in the meantime, they had this distillery and they needed to have some cash flow. So they made this awesome gin as well as a chocolate liqueur with Maru chocolate. So those are the two products available at the time. And I loved the products and I liked the guys. They flew me up to Hanoi to have a kind of an in-person, if you want to call it an interview or just feeling each other out, whatever. And yeah, so they offered me a job. We obviously had more discussions, haggled a little bit on compensation, obviously. And then one of the first things they asked me after I accepted the position was, what do you think about moving to Hanoi? And I said, I don't think about moving to Hanoi. No offense to Hanoi. I've grown to really appreciate that city in its own right. But I live in Saigon. I love Saigon. And also, it's a bigger market. More of my contacts are down here. It made way more sense for me to make trips to Hanoi and to stay in Saigon.
Do you want to start your own podcast, or you want to take your existing podcast and turn it from average to amazing? Then listen to Smarter Podcasting with me, Niall and Mischa, the podcast guy. I'll give you expert tips and insider strategies to make your show stand out. I also talk to podcasting pros like Ariel Nissenblatt, Sam Sethi, and Adam Shively. You'll learn the secrets of growing your audience, improving your content, and turning listeners into loyal fans. Tune in now on Spotify. Just search Smarter Podcasting and start making the best podcast possible today. I have a question about compensation. When that was discussed, did they ever say to you, look, tell you what, we won't pay you any money, but we'll promote you on our social media channels?
It'll be great exposure for your brand. Great exposure? For my personal brand.
Yeah. Oh, it's just me that gets that.
No, yeah.
It's just podcast businesses that get that.
I'm sure there are other businesses we could name that get that as well, not just podcasting.
Oh, photography, any creative industry.
Artists, musicians.
It's hilarious.
It'll be great exposure.
We was talking about it with another podcaster recently, and we were laughing about how, can you imagine if a plumber showed up to your house and you're like, I can't pay you for this, but I'll post it on my social media so everyone can see that.
Everyone else will pay you. I won't, but I'll bring you in all these new customers and they'll pay you.
I got one lately, the guy wanted to hire me for a pittance. I don't even know, he didn't make an offer, but he just didn't want to pay any money basically. But he said, it's in your interest that my brand grows, and when it grows, then I will pay you properly.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you went for that interview at VDD and they said, we want to grow this business. When it grows, then we'll pay you properly.
Well, I mean, nobody's ever put it to me exactly that way before, but obviously working in sales for a long time, a large part of my job is saying no to free shit. And we like to support events and support our clients. And when we can give some free product to sponsor an event or something, if it's beneficial for both sides, of course, we're happy to do it. But the amount of people that ask me for free beer and then for a while for free gin, it's no, what?
I was definitely one of those people when I worked on fundraising, but I would always make sure that you got something out of it.
You were the organizer of a charity network for that was a good cause at least. Some people would just we sent a case to some DJ for some event one time, and it was a friend of a friend, and it was and I knew her, and I'm like, oh, fine. And then her next event, she's like, okay, can you send the case to, and I'm like, you think we're just going to send you a free case of beer for every event you do? You're not even promoting it. You're just drinking it. What? We sent you one case and now we owe you a case every time? Sorry, that's not how this works. No, it's fine. It's a fun little sidebar for anybody who's had to get paid to be an artist or a content creator, whatever you say, and also in sales, if it's a product that people. But yeah, no, I had, without telling on anyone, I had back in the day when Pasteur Street was very much recognized as the leading craft brewery in Vietnam by almost everyone. Someone else started a new company and they weren't distributing; they only had a tap room, and they asked for some free kegs to support their opening. I'm like, okay, how long does that secure us that guest tap if we give you the 2 free kegs up front? And he's never, nothing. You want me to give you 2 free kegs of beer without any guarantee that you'll ever actually buy any kegs of beer? He said, yeah, it'll be good for your brand to be available at our place. I'm like, do you know who the fuck you're talking to? Like, not me personally, but you think it'll be good exposure for Pasteur Street to be like, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he's a good friend of mine now. Like, I like the guy a lot, but it was just like, again, like the way he asked was just like, I'm like, imagine the opposite.
I know. Some people just don't think.
How about you send me 2 free kegs of beer?
Yeah.
How about that?
The plumber example is a good one. Or I even said, like, imagine if a big, muscly brickie showed up to help lay some bricks at your house.
Brickie?
You know what I mean? I don't know what you call them in other countries. We call them a brickie in Scotland.
Bricklayers, I think.
Bricklayer. Brickie's looks like a tradie, like someone like big, muscly, good-looking guy. And you're like,
oh, this interview's taking a turn.
But imagine you're like, can you lay some bricks for me? But I'm just going to post on social media about
Maybe we can figure out some other method of
that's maybe we're going down a different track. So anyway,
you're the one who said how good looking he was.
You're now a VDD gin.
Sorry, yes. So launched myself into it. Obviously, I had some discussions with some other local breweries in between. And it would have felt weird to me to jump from one craft brewery to another in the same city. Part of my effectiveness at my job was I was honest and I was passionate about it. And it was just like, oh, no, here, hey.
It'd be pretty weird if you went from like, you were the Pasteur guy.
Yeah, exactly. I thought
and
so.
Then,
at the time, that was what was going on in my head. And also, I was a little bit naive about how different the spirits and the beer industries are in terms of a lot of things, especially in terms of sales. And I knew Vedity was a very new company, a startup, and I obviously had experience with Pasteur Street, of like being there from the beginning and growing from a startup to a big brand. I was 10 years younger when I did it for Pasteur Street, which definitely made a difference. Also, hammering gin martinis instead of IPAs or wheat ales, it's quite a bit different. I lasted 8 months at Vedity. Again, credit to them. I was able to leave on good terms. I still talk to those guys. I still support their products. If I'm drinking gin, it's usually their gin. They just came out with a rum that I really like, and I've got a bottle of that at home. Like, working in sales is one of the things that you need to learn. Not everyone does. Is like, don't burn bridges. Like, you never know where you're going to meet the person you're talking to next. Like, I had so many hotel accounts that I got because they used to move around from hotel. So if they liked working with me, like at the new place, they're like, oh, let's get Pasteur Street on. So yeah, like I said, 8 months, left on good terms. I was getting some weird vibrations from the universe that I should get back to beer. I could be a little bit more specific about, but it was just like, it just kept popping up and it was all around me. And also like, it was frankly like not healthy, the amount of hard spirits I was drinking. So it was as much a personal as a professional decision. And yeah, I had spoken to Lop Tetrong, founder and CEO at East West Brewing Company, between Pasteur and Vedity. And we had a good chat, but again, from both sides, it didn't seem like a great fit at the time. But after leaving Vedity and revisiting it with Lop, like we had just one Friday night at East West, we talked about all the aspects, what the scope would be. Obviously, again, haggling a little bit about compensation, but not too much. And then he sent me the formal offer the next day. Looked great. It felt very natural to get back into the craft beer industry, just because of the amount of experience I had. And again, I think I said this before. All the equipment got shut off. Yeah, just the spirits and the beer industries are so different, and there's so many different facets and aspects. And especially being a smaller startup brand in the spirits world, you're up against so much, because with craft beer, you're competing with Heineken and Tiger Sapporo, but mostly you're like, it's a friendly competition with the other craft breweries. Like in spirits, nobody gives a fuck if you're craft or small or like whatever. It's like the big guys have money and we're competing with them. Like we weren't competing with Lady True and Biger, like the other local gins. Like really, we were up against these mammoth companies who just threw money at problems. So no matter how much people liked us or liked our gin or liked working with us, it was just like, I felt like Sisyphus. Like just every day I'm fucking pushing that boulder a little further up the hill, and I wake up the next morning and I go, oh, it's back at the bottom again? No, I pushed it up so much last night. Why is this boulder?
Well, it depressed me. I remember when I first found out. So all these different brands you go in, and there's like 50 different brands of spirits behind the bar, all owned by one company. What you're saying, like it's not like you're just against the other gin company. That gin company is owned by one of the biggest multinationals in the world.
Like, we don't have to name names, obviously, and we could. I don't it's not a. But I'd say there are 3 massive distribution companies for spirits in Vietnam. And there's more than 3, but there were 3 that were like the ones that always came up. And if you're opening a new bar, you pick the one you like the best. You make a deal with them for sponsorship. And X% of your menu has to be their products. And then obviously the rest you can fill out with whichever, like some brands are controlled by one company. And whoever has Jack Daniels, they're going to sell a lot because everyone knows Jack Daniels. And you're not a great salesperson by getting Jack Daniels listed at a new cocktail bar. Everyone buys Jack Daniels. So it's...
What a lot of people might not realize though is if you have Jack Daniels on your menu, there's 10 other brands that you will have to have as well because you can't have like Jack. I can't think of an example.
No.
We don't need to go into.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah,
you won't realize that though. You'll just think, oh, they have Gordon's Gin and they have Jack Daniels and they have Jose Cuervo, whatever. Again, I don't even know if they're all the same
exactly.
company.
No, if you're not in the industry, you have no idea who's supplying all these different spirits.
But one supplier is supplying all of them. So that's what my point I'm making is not to name names is. When you're mentioning about going up against the big guys, people who are listening and might not know much about the industry, that's what you mean is you weren't just against Gordon's Gin.
No, exactly.
You were against the company that owns Gordon's Gin, which also owns
the local distributor. And if you're not in the business, it's not something you would ever think of that exactly. The same company that sells them that also sells them that. And these are big name brands that everyone's heard of. It's like they're different companies. It's like, but they're all distributed locally by the same...
Wait till you find out that all the beer is owned by the same company as well. It's going to blow your mind. So moving on then, without going into too much detail, you obviously have a very intricate detail of the hospitality industry, the food and beverage industry in Saigon. And as a consumer mostly, I've just shown some of my knowledge of the industry. A lot of it is
Tell us more about Summer Experiment, Neil.
I know, right? But a lot of my knowledge is through knowing people like yourself. I've worked in events and so on. I know a little bit, not anywhere near the detail that you know. And I'm mostly a consumer and like I've shown on this podcast, go to craft beer bars, cocktail bars. So I see it mostly as a consumer. As a consumer and a supplier, how have you seen Saigon change and develop in the 5 years since we've done that first podcast? Because as obviously I've talked about, for me, it has changed massively.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So the first example that comes to mind, and I was just talking to someone about this the other day, like when I mean, 5 years is a little narrow, but when I first came here, there were, speaking of Jack Daniels, there were some bars on Boy Vien where the bartenders didn't know what a Jack and Coke was. It's like, how do I make that? It's fucking Jack and Coke, bud.
If you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, no, fair. And then I was at some really high-end cocktail bar the other night with a friend of mine from Hanoi, and just the level of service, the detail, we just did a podcast talking about a few different cocktail bars, and just the attention to detail, the level of just the skill level that these young Vietnamese bartenders have is amazing. And I don't know where these kids came from, but I was just talking to this Australian guy. He's in town. He sells Florida Kenya. He's like the regional ambassador. He doesn't live here, but he was in town for an event. And we were talking about it, and he was talking about how amazing it was to go to these different high-end cocktail bars in Saigon, and especially to bring in brand ambassador bartenders. There's this Australian guy who, they're both Australian. I'm telling the story of 2 guys. One's a brand ambassador, one's a bartender. And the bartender, everyone treated him like a superstar. And the brand ambassador, Rob, he was saying, these kids are so humble and they just want to learn and they love having him here because they're asking questions. And some countries are the opposite. He's in Singapore. These kids think they're so hot shit. They're too impressed with themselves to ask a question. Whereas these kids in Saigon and Vietnam, they're hungry for the knowledge. They want to be better. They know that even if they know that they're good, they know that they're young and they know that they can learn and they want to. So that hunger to get better and to achieve the highest levels in both restaurants and bars, that didn't exist when I moved here. There were hardly any Western restaurants. Some of them were good. Some of them weren't. the service industry has come so far so quickly. The level of just specificity and skill in F&B with these Vietnamese kids, it's mind-blowing what a gap they've had to bridge to get from where it was to where it is now.
Hello, I'm Steve Ahern, one of the judges of the Asia Podcast Awards. I'm interrupting this episode to let you know that you're listening to an award-winning podcast. This podcast won its category in the 2024 Podcast Awards, so you know you're listening to quality. Enjoy your listening experience, and congratulations to the team who created this award-winning podcast for you.
And in typical Vietnam fashion, they've done it in record time.
It's super quick. It's insane. Yeah. And obviously not every Western restaurant here has a high standard of service. There are some still where like the staff aren't trained very well. But even then, like, and I've told this story before, but like, growing up in Scotland or Canada or any like Western style country, you're used to a certain style of service, whether it's Denny's or the Four Seasons, whatever. Like, the steps of service are familiar to us because we grew up going to restaurants. And whether it's high end or low end, doesn't matter. The server comes up, they take your drink order, they come back with the drinks, they take your food order, they come back with the food, they stop and ask you how everything's going about halfway through or 5 minutes in, whatever the thing is. They collect all your plates, they give you the bill, you pay, you tip, you go, thanks so much for coming. These young Vietnamese kids, they're used to street food restaurants. And that's not a knock on Vietnamese street food restaurants. They're amazing, but those steps of service just don't exist.
No.
You know?
The
like
one that
MOA, and you point at the dish you want.
The one that doesn't exist the most back then in street food places is not picking up the plate.
Yeah.
Don't expect to sit down at a table that's been cleaned and reset for you. It's going to have the remnants of the last person's food in front of you, and you just got to deal with that. And that was a big thing. The translation to Western places, when we first got here 8 years ago, didn't always happen. So you'd be in a Western restaurant and your food would your empty plate would sit there. And you're like, are you going to empty my plate?
Can you take this?
But they're just not, it's not what they're
exactly.
used to. Now I find it's gone too far in the other direction, which again is another kind of lovely Vietnamese trait, is they take things too literally. And you barely even had your last bite and they're already taking your plate away. And or you're with your partner, like I'm with Adri, and she's still eating, and then they take your plate away, and I'm like, just wait.
You can relax a little bit.
Yeah. And again, it's so lovely. It's like you've been trained, take the plates when they're finished, but you've taken that too literally.
Right.
Just wait.
I want to meet the person who trained all these young Vietnamese F&B kids to make sure they confirm the quantity of every item when you order it.
That's amazing.
I can order a whole roasted chicken, and they'll be like, one? I'm the only one here. Like, literally, I'll start with an IPA. One? No, bring 10. I'll get through them.
I've not noticed that one.
Oh, I notice it all the time. And obviously it doesn't bother me. It's just so funny. It's so funny.
The other thing I thought you were going to say, the thing that I've noticed the big difference was, in the beginning, they would never confirm your order and it would often be wrong.
Right.
Or sometimes just not show up. Whereas now, places of a decent standard, and even, it doesn't have to be a high standard, but that has now been trained into them.
They repeat back.
Let me repeat your order for you. And that never used to happen. And now it's just that easy step. If they've missed something, you're like, oh no, you didn't get this, or blah, blah, blah.
And 99 times out of 100, they got it right. But it's you're right. It's a lovely little confirmation that I know I'm going to get the right food.
So on that note, I think it's just great to hear your story, that you obviously East West it's amazing seeing all your posts again. You're seeing your passion for beer.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I feel like we didn't talk about East West enough. Yeah, no, it's just like coming back into the beer industry for a company that I really have always respected, incredibly professional, really good beers. The original brewmaster, Sean, has moved back to the States, and this guy Patrick has taken over, and he used to work on the innovation team at Sierra Nevada with Alex, ex of Pasteur Street, having left. We were talking yesterday. I think Patrick's probably got the most experience of any brewer in Vietnam right now, and him and the team. And credit also to Niall and Mischa, his two Vietnamese. Obviously, there's more than 3 people at the brewery, but they're the main brewers, and they're all awesome, and they're all banging out these awesome seasonal beers. I'll send Patrick a message about one of the new beers that we've got on at the tap room. Hey man, great job on that. And he's like, I didn't make that. That one was Nhi, or that one was Trung. And I'm like, oh, that's great. So he's given them a lot of freedom to experiment and come up, because we do a lot of like super small batches. So like 120 liters, which is not super economical, but it's also, that's craft. Like you experiment in small batches. And then if something really hits, you make a bigger batch. And then if it still really hits, then you make an even bigger batch. Like that's the heart of craft beer, is experimentation, innovation, doing new stuff. And yeah, the amount of, and also we're in the midst of upgrading and moving production facilities. So there's a lot of upheaval right now, and these guys are still banging out all these awesome seasonal beers. A lot of them you can only get at the tap room. On the sales side, I know which clients have room for extra beers when they come available. So I know who to call when I've got an awesome new season. Oh, that guy likes sour beers. I'll make sure I let him know that we've got a new sour beer you should get.
Nobody likes sour beers. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't like sour beers. But I
love sour beers.
I know you do, and I know Adri does as well. I'm not a fan. East West has been about for a while, and I feel like their growth stagnated a little bit. They're really great. They've got like in the mini stops, and you can get a couple of cans in there. I've not seen much of them on draft and on tap. And so I remember when a few years ago, I went to Mango Bay in Phu Quoc, and we had a Jasmine IPA, Sunset, beautiful, with Lewis and Kim having his birthday dinner. And I remember I sent you a message, and I was just like, well done. Because I was sitting there drinking a Jasmine IPA, and I was like, you did this. This is nationwide. This beer is here, in part.
Well, I mean, I closed that account, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You helped spread Pasteur across the nation and make it, as you said, the number one craft beer in Vietnam. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with East West, because I know that over the next few years, you're going to take what you did with Pasteur and you're going to do it to East West, because I think they've got a bigger base, probably. Maybe, I don't know, but they've got a bigger infrastructure, maybe. And I'm really excited to see more of East West.
So yeah, the big difference in the two companies to me was just the approach as well as the customer base. So obviously every craft brewery in Vietnam needs to do a better job of selling to Vietnamese people.
And I've watched that transition.
Not just to foreigners and tourists. A lot of it's not easy, because it's a bunch of white guys trying to tap into old white guys trying to tap into a young Vietnamese market. He's Vietnamese American. Like, he went to school in San Diego. That's where he met his business partner, Steve. They opened the brewery together. But like, he's super dialed into the local and also the premium local market.
And you get to drink great beer. So on that note, I think it's time to go downstairs to Mini Stop, get an East West.
Okay.
Enjoy a beer. And thank you very much for being on season 10.
The finale.
The final episode. We're going to start season 11 soon. I already have the guests lined up. I've spoke to them all. I'm going to be recording episodes soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being part.
Sorry, can I do a little inside baseball, like behind the scenes? Is there like a theme to the next season, or are you just going to...
Back to normal, regular scheduling, interviewing awesome people connected to Vietnam. So a nice mixture of just really interesting people and sharing their stories.
I look forward to it. And you're going to be the host.
And I'm going to be the host.
Okay.
I'm back. I'm back with my energy.
Back in the New York crew.
Back, baby.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I cannot believe that so many people love this podcast. Like, I get messages, not all the time, but every now and again, I get such lovely messages, even from yourself. Like, I posted an episode recently and you sent a comment about wanting Adri back for more. And I was like, oh, that was like in the last minute of the podcast. So
at the very end, yeah. At the very end, you said if you want Adri to host more podcasts, let us know.
Yo, Adri, you're going to host more podcasts. No, we're going to get Adri back on soon. Thank you very much. We're going to pass 100,000 downloads, which sometimes that might not sound that much, because you always hear about people with like millions of downloads, and you're like, those
are international celebrities.
Yeah, they're the top 1%.
Right. You started this out of your front room.
Yeah, and I also think that this, and if you can correct me because I may be wrong on this, but I think this is the longest running English language podcast in Vietnam.
Yes.
Which is no mean feat.
No.
So that's pretty cool. So remember, if you want to join our Patreon.
You're up for some awards, yeah? Did you win the awards?
No, it's next week. I go to KL on Sunday. Okay. So I'm heading to KL on Sunday. A Vietnam podcast. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, by the time this
goes out, we'll already know. It's been nominated for Best Interview Podcast in Asia, which is incredible.
Yeah, I hope you win, but also getting nominated is
incredible. Panel of 3 judges.
Absolutely amazing.
And I've been nominated personally for Best Audio Producer for the work that I do on other podcasts. So really excited about that. So thank you everyone who's voted for me. You'll find out by now if we've won. Remember, go to patreon.com/A Vietnam podcast to join our community and follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, do all that cool stuff. And the best thing that you can do is share this podcast with someone else who loves Vietnam and wants to know more about this incredible country and incredible city.
Up Saudi.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Hột gà nướng, hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, bắp xào đây.
I wanted to share with you about one of my favorite affiliate partners, and that is Fiverr. I've been using Fiverr for years for everything from ordering YouTube thumbnails to keyword research, writing podcast articles, even to Canva designs and thumbnails and more. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a podcaster, or anyone in between, Fiverr has got you covered. It really is the go-to platform if you want to find freelancers offering a massive range of services to help you on any project. Maybe you need a stunning new logo or just a short animation, whatever you need, you can find it on Fiverr. What I love the most is how easy Fiverr makes it to connect with talented freelancers from around the world, all at prices that will fit whatever your budget is. Plus, with Fiverr's secure payment system, you can trust that your transactions are safe and secure. No dodgy people you meet on Facebook groups that disappear with your money and never give you what you want. What, that's only happened to me? As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you use the link and at no extra cost to you. As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you click my link and you buy something, all at no extra cost to you. And best of all, you will be directly supporting the making of this podcast that you're listening to for free, but it is not free to make. So why wait? Head over to somewhere that you've probably never been before. It's called the show notes. So whatever app you're listening in, if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything at all, head to the show notes, click on my special link, and then you can browse thousands of gigs ready to help you with your next project.